and really important for the gut. I love the they would be the non-viable cells. So when you measure AFUs through flow cytometry, you get a much more comprehensive picture of what's in that tube. You now know who's alive, but you also know who's dead, and you know what fraction of that sample is actually alive versus dead. And so these are the ways in which we measure our strains, and we report them out. We actually report out active fluorescent units as opposed to colony-forming units. And so one of the strains that I'm going to talk about today is really to highlight Akkermansia muciniphila. This is a strain that has really emerged over the last 10 years as a keystone strain and really important for the gut. I love this question, which is, what is the best way to rebuild the gut from long-term COVID diarrhea? I'm going to talk about Akkermansia and its potential role in helping with GI issues and really thinking about the gut. And one of the things I love about this image here is that it really points to one of the key features about Akkermansia, which is that it lives in the gut lining. It is literally there making sure that the gut lining and the mucin layer that keeps it together is being properly regulated. And so Akkermansia is a keystone strain for metabolic health. For anybody who's done a microbiome test recently, you'll know that most microbiome tests actually highlight on page 1, at the top of page 1, your levels of Akkermansia, because it is such an important strain. It lives in the mucosal layer, and in a healthy gut microbiome, it is really abundant. It can comprise 1 to 3% of the gut microbiome. And so what's been found is that if you have low levels of Akkermansia muciniphila, this is associated with a wide variety of diseases, ranging from things like obesity and diabetes to inflammation, gut barrier dysfunction, bowel disease, neurological disorders, and even anxiety and depression, and most recently, osteoporosis. And so what we're starting to understand is that low levels of Akkermansia are affiliated with all these different disease states. And so it really is important to have the right amount of Akkermansia in the gut. As I mentioned, we really started to learn about this strain over the last decade. And one of the interesting things here is when you look at the number of publications over time, you can see that prior to 2010, there's really almost no publications on Akkermansia. And for those of you who've sort of been keeping track of the DNA sequencing world, you'll know that in the early to mid 2000s is when DNA sequencing technologies became affordable and usable enough for us to apply them in the microbiome space. And so what you find is that starting at 2010, we start to be able to actually sequence Akkermansia and know that the low levels of Akkermansia associated with diseases, and to start to really understand what is the mechanism of action by which Akkermansia is acting. And so this is an image really showing what we know to date about Akkermansia. And as I said, we're starting to learn more and more about this strain. And so you can expect that we're going to find out more as more publications come out. But this is an image of Akkermansia at the very top. It's a little bug-looking guy, and the mucosal layer in the gut. And what you can see right out of the gates is that we know kind of 3 important things about Akkermansia. So the first thing we know is that on the far right side here, it produces a protein called P9. And P9 is important because it is a protein that binds to the ICAM2 receptor in L cells and stimulates the production of GLP-1. The second thing we know about Akkermansia is that it produces propionate, which is a precursor to butyrate. And so short-chain fatty acids have been shown to play a really important role in health. And in particular, butyrate is known to bind to G protein-coupled receptors 41 and 44, which also stimulate L cells to produce GLP-1, as well as help with gut barrier integrity. The third thing we know about Akkermansia on the far left there is that on the surface, it has a protein called AMUC 1100. And this surface protein is really important because it binds to the TLR2 receptor. And that is important for stimulating not only gut barrier integrity, but also immune homeostasis. And so when these 3 different roles of Akkermansia are in play, what we find is that you are getting good gut barrier integrity, proper immune homeostasis, and GLP-1 production, which leads to both weight management as well as blood glucose control. Maybe we'll look at some of these questions here. Jen, if you...
Before we get into the studies, so Stephanie asked a really good question. Is Akkermansia found in infants? Is it considered a human bacteria?
Yes, so Akkermansia is found in abundance in adults and teens and has been found in toddlers. Now, I don't know how early I don't know that people there's consensus on how early you can start to see akkermansia showing up in the gut, but it is definitely a human, a bacteria that resides in the human gut microbiome. It also can be found actually in animal microbiomes, and it is in vast abundance in healthy people. So this is a naturally occurring strain in the gut microbiome of people.
Awesome. Thank you. Nancy asks, is this in the small or large intestine?
Yes. So we're really talking about the distal colon here of the large intestine for the gut microbiome. But I should also say that I don't know that it is totally clear exactly all the different parts of the GI tract where akkermansia exists, but it's certainly concentrated in the distal colon.
Awesome. There's a lot of disease-specific questions. I think we'll tackle some of them when we get into the studies. But one question that might be good now, Michelle asks, can akkermansia be tolerated by those with histamine intolerance?
Jen, do you want to take that
I
one?
think I can do that one. So we obviously haven't tested our strain specifically with all those with histamine intolerance, but I did work on the customer side of things before I switched over to the healthcare team. And I spoke with many of our customers who do have histamine intolerances and tolerated akkermansia totally fine.